going to talk about versioning for your assets in a WordPress website. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the entire process from looking at the front end of your website in the HTML and the DOM, and then take you back into where the theme is, working with it, and then back into the WordPress API core. Let's start here by opening up DevTools. And we're going to come up here into the head of the HTML, and this is in the DOM. You'll hear me for the newbies that may not know what I'm talking about. The DOM here, I work a lot in JavaScript, so excuse me if I use terms that you're unfamiliar with. We're going to scroll down here to the themes style sheet, and here is that style sheet. You can see that this is a Genesis child theme that I'm using, and it is appending a version onto the end of this particular asset. Now, you're going to ask me, okay, why is that significant? If you're making edits or changes to your site, and people have already visited your site previously and have not cleared the cache of their browser, whatever particular browser that they're using, their browser has stored or cached the resources from your website, including this particular style sheet that I'm looking at. The way that the browser knows that it needs to go and get a new asset from the server is if this particular reference here to the link actually changes. And the one way that WordPress manages that is to append a version onto the end of that particular file. So therefore, anytime the version increments, then the browser knows to go and download a new version of that particular resource, so that your users can then see whatever that you've changed it on your site, for example, a color or whatever else that maybe you've changed on your website. So it's important that you understand how this version works and where you change it at within your particular theme. Alright, so this is the front end, and I just talked about that. And as you go down, if you want to take a look at your website, you can see every one of these has a version appended to the end of the particular resource for those reasons that I just discussed. Let's take a look at the theme now. So I'm going to close that out and let's open up some code. I'm going to open up the Genesis child theme, and right at the top of all the Genesis child themes will be this version number, and you can see that it is set at 1.0. And if you remember, that actually corresponds with the version number that we saw in the head for the style sheet. And for, I think this one does have, yeah, it should have some JavaScript that it's also going to be loading up there, and it would append that to the JavaScript as well. So if you were to then go into your site and you had any of the Genesis child themes, what you would do is, if you make an edit to either the JavaScript and or the styling within the theme itself, you're going to want to increment this particular number. And it can be anything that you want. Let's say I want it to be like this, and I have a tendency to do that. We're going to get rid of that now. If you're working with some other theme, and I'm just going to look at the default ones that get loaded up here with WordPress, and you came down to where it's actually enqueuing the styles and the scripts, we can scroll over and you can see here is the version that they are appending here in the default for this particular theme as well. And again, that's going to be added into the HTML for your site on the front end. Okay, so I'm going to close this out. Just remember, this is how the theme interacts with it, and any plugin that you're using will also have some sort of version that it's going to want to also encode. Alright, let's take a look here. when you encode a resource, or enqueue a resource, sorry about that, it would either be a script or a style here. And we're going to look at how this breaks down. But let's pull this open on Codex, if we could here, and we'll go WordPress. I want you to get familiar with using this. This is something that you need to use as a reference constantly when you're coding. The very first parameter is going to be a handle, then the source, anything that this particular script is going to depend on, whatever the version is, and you would set this to true if you want it to load in the footer instead of in the head part of your theme, or sorry, not your theme, but of your browser-free website. Okay, the version here is a string, and you can see it does specify the version number, and it does get concatenated to the end of that particular path for that query string. It's a long fancy way of just saying that it gets appended to the end of the link to that particular script. Alright, let's go back to the code. So if we look at this, we can see that here is the source to this particular script, and I'm going to close that back out again and open this up. And the one that we're talking about right now is this particular one, and it is dependent upon jQuery, obviously, and the version that it's loading is that particular version. Alright, so that is how the theme is handling it. We need to now take a look at how WordPress actually takes care of this. So what I want you to do is we want to search for and find where this particular function is at within the code itself. And I've cheated and went ahead and pulled this up, and if you want to find it, scroll down to the bottom here. In a codex, it always tells you exactly where the source file is at. So here's where the source is at, and that's where I'm at, is in WP-scripts.php, and obviously that's has a prefix of functions dot in front of it. Alright, so again, it has the same definitions up here in the top for all the parameters that get passed in, and it does have some defaults set, and that's going to match up with what you saw there on Codex. The very first thing it's going to do is it's going to pull in the global, and it's going to look to see if that global has been set. If it has not been set yet, so this would be like the first script coming in, then the very first thing it's going to do is instantiate this class to give us a new object for WP_scripts. Open. It's right here. Get rid of that. And here are the WP scripts. Once we have that global set up, then the first thing it's going to want to do is add this particular script that you are enqueuing and registering into WordPress. It's going to want to add that to the global. So if we go and we find where this add is at, you're going to actually see that it's not contained within this particular class. Instead, this class is extending another base class for dependencies, and it's going to be found in there. So let's go and we will find that particular function. And here's that function here. So basically this is responsible for registering the resource that you just called back here. So we're passing the handle, the source, any of the depends, as well as the version, and we're passing that through scripts over here to its base class, and then that's getting pulled in and attached by the handle into registered. But it's also opening up a new object itself, which basically this is a model for this particular script, if you will, and this is contained down at the bottom. So we can come down and look at this. That is down here. Here it is. It's down at the bottom. So this just gives us a handy little model. They call it a helper. I call it a model. That then here is the add data. So it brings it in. It pulls in the appends, and then it does an add data and adds this in. This particular object then is then loaded and registered here into the scripts. Okay, so once we do that, now it's going to see, does it need to be loaded into the footer, and if yes, it's going to add data. And that particular data is just letting us know that it's going into that group. So that then the system knows to pull that only when WP_footer is being called to load those scripts in. Okay, so this is how it gets registered into the global. Now you're going to say, okay, that's great. We jumped around a lot, but how is that getting rendered out to the browser? So let's take a look at what gets called, when it gets called, and so on. The very first thing that's going to happen is WP_head is going to be called. You can hook in, and there's going to be another tutorial on hooks and actions and filters, all the different hooks and how those work. But basically just know that you are assigning a callback to the function which is WP_head, and then head is going to then go and call all those callback functions and execute them. Okay, so if we go down the list here, and you can assign a priority, so here is where we're enqueuing scripts, and that's set to a priority of 1. We come on down the list, and what you'll see is that printing of the head scripts. Loader, you can do a global search and find it. 9. Here are the styles, and here are the scripts. Alright, so what's happening here? It's going to run through, it's going to see if the scripts global is already set, and if not, we're just going to return an empty array because there's nothing to be enqueued. In this particular case, let's assume that we have enqueued, and now we need to call print head scripts function. And you jump down to line 772, and now we have the print head scripts function. Okay. Again, you see this global WP_scripts. You're seeing that a lot, aren't you? Alrighty, so let's just scoot on down. A lot of this looks the same, and we'll see that we have some concatenation that could be occurring here, but the main thing we want to take a look at today is do head items. So within that object, there is a method called do head items. Let's go and see if we can find that, right? So we know that WP_scripts is actually contained in this particular class, and we did a real quick search and came down here to the method do head items. The very first call that's going to occur is we need to then call do items. And you're going to see that that is not in this particular class. Again, it's going to be found within the base class, which is WP_dependencies. And we are looking for do items, which roughly, if you run down through the code here, you can see it's got handles. Here are all the dependencies. It's going to loop through each of the ones that are being added in. Yep. It's going to check, check, check. Now here's what's important. Do item. So it's just basically at the top here, just running through to see which ones that it needs to handle, but we really want to find do item. And that is here where it processes a particular dependency. Now that's also okay, so the scripts class is actually overloading the base dependencies do item. So it's going to manage its own do item methodology. So we're going to come down here. I'll talk about this in later videos, but for now, just ignore all of this unless you want to spend some time looking at it. But what we're most interested in is how is this version itself being attached to the source. There is a function that WordPress has in it called add_query_arg. And if you were to go over to the codex, this gives you a pretty good rundown of what that does. But basically, it's just going to be modifying the URL with a query string. It's going to be appending whatever you are passing in as a key and a value to the end of the query itself. So it gives some pretty good examples here. Let's go down and take a look here at this particular one. We see example.com/link question mark then, which now we're saying that these are our optional parameters. We have baz being passed in, and you can see that up here above, right? And we are passing QUX to it, and that's what's getting appended. Alright, so let's go back to our code. Here we have version is the key, VER is the key. What's going to be appended to that then is the actual version itself, and that actually is then getting appended to source. And that's being stored back here in the variable source. Then we're escaping that through. We have a filter that can be applied, and basically we come down and we say if there is no source, it's going to return. Otherwise, you can see here is where the script is being built out and stored into the HTML tag variable. Here is the source right there. We come down and we can see that we're going to ignore this concatenation. Again, that's for internal HTML or WordPress resources. The one we're interested in is the else, and you can see it echoes out this tag, which we just saw above is the actual script. So that's how that source is being echoed out. And for those who don't know, echo just basically means it's being rendered out to the browser when this is called. So it's an immediate process. I did skip ahead a little bit here on the versioning, so let's just pop back up here real quick and make sure that you understand that when we registered this particular script by its handles, it had a version attached to it. And right here we see that if there is a version attached to it, then that is passed. Otherwise, it's going to grab the default version. And the default version itself is going to be off of the blog info. And that's how that gets passed to it. Okay, so that's how it's getting rendered out to your browser. Now, as I said in the beginning of this, what's important is anytime you make a change, you want to then increment your theme or your plugin's version. WordPress will then take care of appending that new version to the resource itself, and that makes sure that all your users out here who have already visited your website will get your latest and greatest changes. Thanks.